Hi everyone, welcome, Vera here, London-based nature-inspired abstract artist. Welcome to my weekly video series, direct from the Artist Studio Dispatches. As you know, this year, 2018, one of my resolutions is to be doing weekly videos to share a bit more about my life and my work and what I do in the art studio and what I do in my outside life, just to get some more inspiration. So this week, or really the past couple of weeks, I've been working on a new series of weaving artworks. At the end of last year, I did 3 weaving artworks, which I'll show you a little bit about how they work down here below. I've got some kind of in progress type of artwork. But at the end of last year, when we had the Wimbledon Art Studios Art Fair show in November, I wanted to do a bunch of new work. So I did 3 weavings, and then I did a few acrylic on canvas mixed media works as well. And a lot of them had really positive feedback, and actually all 3 weavings have now officially found new homes. My canvas and acrylic work as well, a couple of pieces found new homes as well, but really what struck me was how much people really respond to the weavings. And it's something that I've been thinking about doing for a while, but I wasn't quite sure whether it would work or whether it's something I wanted to pursue. And I just wanted to make sure that I have a clear idea of what I wanted to do with the weavings, how I wanted them to work and what to say. And as often the case with art, I had a lot of sort of testers and experiments, a lot of trying different media or different ways of doing the weavings and figuring out what I think worked and didn't work. So, now that the original 3 have found new homes, part of my plan for this year is to do a few more of those weavings. Like I say, I think people have really responded to them, and for me, it really taps into a long-held interest in textiles in specific. I adore textiles, whether it's in the form of sort of knitting with yarn, or whether it's rugs, or whether it's cross-stitching. I was one of those teenagers who had the very uncool hobby of cross-stitching. And over the years I've done lots of things, sort of more crafty type things with textiles. Doing sort of handmade Christmas ornaments out of felt and hand stitching. Kind of stitching my own clothes at some point. That was kind of, again, during the teenage years. And recently I've started introducing some textiles in some of my canvas-based work. And I'll show you some of that in some of those pieces in another video. But really, for me, the textiles interest has been long held. And I suppose for a long time, I wasn't quite sure I wanted to pursue it, partly because there is this idea in the art world that textiles as a medium is not considered very fine art by some people. Not by me, but by some people. And that some people see textiles as more of a craft rather than an art form. And that once you introduce textiles into your work, somehow it takes it away from the world of fine art and defines the work as more of a craft type pursuit. I do disagree with all that. To me, at the end of the day, especially when you're working in modern day society and there's lots of mixed media, surely one of the media that you can use as mixed media is fiber, is textiles. The other thing that I've always found crazy as to why some people have a sort of negative interpretation of textiles in the art world is that really fine art, as many people define it, the type of art that you see in museums, in the National Gallery, in the Louvre, and the Prado, a lot of that art would not exist without textiles. A lot of that art is oil paintings, some acrylic, but lots of oil paintings on a surface. And that surface is mostly canvas. And canvas is always a textile. Canvas is either linen or cotton or some sort of blend between the two. But really, canvas itself, the surface on which so much fine art is done, is fundamentally a textile. So again, to me, this whole idea that textile is not fine art is just crazy. So then, at the end of last year, I decided why not? It's an interest I've had for a long time, and why not incorporate it into some of my work? It's something that I feel really passionate about, So really, at some point, you just have to follow your heart and hope that people respond to it the way that you do. So what I did is basically, and the other bit, just to say in terms of the surface that you draw on and that you paint on, the other bit that I found absolutely fascinating is watercolor paper. Not kind of just the basic watercolor paper that you get, which is often made out of wood pulp, but really high standard artist quality watercolor paper. So a lot of the paper that I use, mainly, is made by a company called Fabriano, which is based in Italy, and it's been going for hundreds of years. But their watercolor paper, in particular the kind that I use, which is kind of acid-free and super archival and artist quality, but also has really beautiful thickness and texture, that watercolor paper is actually 100% cotton. And when I found that out, again, I thought, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that even paper, which most people would assume, fundamentally is some sort of wood product, trees or anything like that, actually certain kind of paper, and particularly paper for certain artists, such as myself, is 100% textile, it's 100% cotton. Again, interesting fact. So, the weavings themselves, basically, they start life in watercolor paper strips. So I tear all these strips by hand. I like to sort of tear them just to make sure the edges have a bit of interest. I found early on that when I cut them, or when I use sort of a knife to cut them or scissors, the edges are too sharp and they're too clinical, they're somehow too clean, and that didn't really go with the look that I was going for with the weavings, which is much more organic and raw, I suppose, and just more textile based. So each one starts with, like I say, a strip of watercolor paper, and then they are painted on with a variety of media, mainly liquid acrylic ink and some actual acrylic paint. So you can see over here on the table that I have here, because it's all water-based, I tend to work flat. If you work vertically, then obviously all the paint will drip off. But you can see here I have a sea of watercolor paper strips that have been painted on and textured with a variety of tools, including a screwdriver, my personal favorites, to create all sorts of patterns and colors. And just really, to me, this bit of the process is super fun, because that's where you get to play with the colors and the textures, and you texturize, well, I texturize the paper itself, so that each strip ends up being like its own little piece of art. So then, once they're dried, which does take a couple days depending on the weather, then I go over them with pencil or more acrylic paint, or sometimes paint pens. In this case, this was some texture that I added with some white acrylic paint. And really the idea is, again, just to give it a bit more texture, a bit more interest. And I don't do this treatment on all the strips. I found early on that there's a nice balance between adding a bit of white elements just to lift the composition and to give it a bit more interest, and also a balance between not being too detailed, I suppose, or too textured, because then the eye gets lost. It's just somehow too much. So the final piece, which will be coming over the next kind of few days and few weeks as I finish all the raw materials up, is to actually weave them together. And when I say weave them together, I literally mean, weave them together, freeform. And this is also one of my personal favorites, because doing the raw materials, the strips, is quite labor intensive, as you can imagine. By the time that you tear them and you paint them and you texture them and they dry, and then you paint some more and they dry again, it's quite a labor intensive process. And really the final bit is the weaving. And the weaving, to me, early on I decided that I didn't want it to be as regimented as kind of one up, one down, one up, one down, one up, one down. If you've done any sort of weaving, whether it's even in sort of kindergarten type thing or any craft classes, that's kind of the classic weave. And I thought to myself that while that works, that's not really what I'm going for here. What I'm going for here is to still have an element of well, my own personality and my own interest in terms of what I think looks good, but also just to have an element of spontaneity. So I tend to switch around, one up, one down, one up, two down, two up, one down, and just to play around with some of the spacing and some of the different colors and textures to make sure that what I come out in the end is something that I find quite interesting. And in terms of the watercolor paper strips, I have ones which are thicker, which are thinner, some which are a lot more kind of colored than others, others which are quite neutral. So really it's just a matter of finding a composition that I think works, which can sometimes take a while. And there's a lot of kind of back and forth that you put a piece in, you pull it out, a day later, a couple days later, you say, no, that piece doesn't quite work. I think another color needs to go in there. Or actually just moving them down and to make sure they all are in the position that you want them to be in. So at the end, and this is just, you can see this is literally just kind of 2 seconds me doing this without really thinking about it. This is a sample of what a final weaving looks like. Obviously, after I explained everything about the one up, one down, I've done this very much one up, one down, partly because I'm chatting with you while I'm doing it, so I'm not really thinking about the composition. And this is not necessarily the colors that I would go for in one piece. I like to have a combination of colors, some which are a bit bolder, some which are a bit more neutral, just to kind of keep the interest and the balance of the color of the final piece just right. But yeah, so that's where we are. That, like I say, this is sort of a sample. And then once they're woven, then I put them on a backing paper. Again, archival artist quality backing paper, so that when they're framed, what you're framing obviously is the front, which is the weaving, that's the artwork, but the backing paper can have something to adhere to. It's not that the weaving, I didn't want to make the weaving so fragile that people couldn't actually frame them or anything like that. They do need to be framed. They are paper, even though it's textiles, they are paper at the end of the day. They do need to be framed and protected. So that's why at the end, in the back, I do put, like I say, just a backing paper to tie everything together, make sure that none of the pieces will sort of come out of where they're meant to be, and just to make sure that they're sort of easier to transport and for framing as well. So that's where we're at. And as you, like I say, you can see there's lots of colors. There's some of the yellow ones, some oranges, some greens. Here on the table, I have a sea of reds, oranges. I'm really feeling reds. I don't know why, but I'm really, really feeling reds and yellows. I went through kind of a blue color scheme last year, the past couple of years, and now I'm really more into warm colors. But there's some purples in here as well, which I adore. So yeah, that's where we're at. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this little sort of behind the scenes peek at what I'm working on now. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'd love to hear what you think about the weavings and just anything else. And also, whether you want to connect in person and come visit me in my studio at the Wimbledon Art Studios. I'm now Studio 310 in the Blue Building, the first floor. Or whether you want to connect with me on social media, whether it's through Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or YouTube. I'm Vera on the wall. That's sort of my tag name, my handle on pretty much all of my social media accounts. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you next time, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much again. Bye!